While the world's markets chase headlines, a different kind of movement is quietly underway. South of the shipping lanes, concrete is being poured on land that officially does not exist. This isn't a resort and it isn't a retreat. It's the opening move in something far larger. The satellite feed that captured this was never meant to reach the public. Analysts who reviewed the coordinates found something strange. The search returns nothing. No country claims this water. No registry lists this land. That absence is the first clue. For decades, the ultra-wealthy have hedged against markets, currencies, even governments. Now, a small circle is hedging against the idea of a nation itself. They aren't buying property anymore. They're buying an exit. This is the vanishing coordinate. The 0.01% have spent years quietly opting out of civilization's shared risks. Private clinics, private security, private food supply, private power. What's rising on this atoll may be the final piece of that pattern. Not a house, a state. By the end of this story, you'll understand why researchers are calling this the first real sovereign experiment in a generation. Why the paperwork behind it was engineered specifically to disappear, and why the people financing it never intended for any of this to surface. This is the Forbidden Island. This is where the world ends. To understand how an island disappears from the map, you have to follow the paperwork, not the property. It starts, as it almost always does, with a shell company, then another, then a trust that owns the company that owns the trust. By the fourth layer, no regulator on Earth can say who actually holds the deed. The mechanism itself is nothing new. Flags of convenience have existed for a century. Ship owners have used them for decades to register vessels under lenient foreign flags. What's new is applying the same trick to an entire landmass. Register the island like a ship, and suddenly it answers to almost no one. Investigators tracing the purchase found the first sale buried in a maritime court filing. The buyer's name was a holding company registered in a jurisdiction with no public ownership record. That company was owned by another, incorporated the same week. The trail simply stops there, as by design. It stops completely. Real estate lawyers describe this structure as the onion. You peel one layer only to find another. Each layer is legal on its own. Together, they form something close to invisible. No single filing breaks any law, not a single one. That's exactly what makes it so effective, beyond effective. Before the concrete arrived, the legal work had to erase every prior claim. A local fishing cooperative once held informal rights to these waters. Those rights were quietly bought out, one family at a time, over 18 months. No public announcement, no press, just signatures, silent signatures. Then came the reclassification, from protected reef to private maritime infrastructure. A single administrative stroke changed what the law could touch. Environmental review requirements vanished with it. Poof! So did most oversight. Absolute silence. The island's new status borrows from a real, if obscure, legal tradition, seasteading law. For 15 years, theorists have argued that international waters offer a loophole around national sovereignty. Most seasteading projects stayed theoretical. Funding always ran out first. This is the first one with money behind it that never runs out. Never. The financing itself was structured to be untraceable by conventional means. Payments moved through 4 jurisdictions in under 6 hours. Each transfer was legal. Each recipient was a different shell. By the time the money landed, its origin was functionally unknowable. One investigator who spent 2 years on offshore finance called it the cleanest structure I've ever seen. Not because it broke new legal ground, but because it used every existing loophole at once. Tax law, maritime law, trust law, corporate secrecy law. Stacked together, they built something closer to a private nation than a private estate. Public records that once listed the reef simply stopped updating. Marine chart authorities quietly noted a pending review and never finished it. 3 separate satellite imagery providers blurred the same coordinates within a month. None of them explained why. Absolute zero explanation. A Freedom of Information request filed by a regional journalist returned a single line, "File sealed." No further explanation was given. The journalist's follow-up request went unanswered for over a year. It remains completely and utterly unanswered to this very day. What makes this different from ordinary offshore secrecy isn't the hiding, it's the building. Most shell structures exist to hide money. This one exists to hide a place. And a place, unlike money, eventually has to answer for its own existence. Construction permits for the island were never filed with any national authority. Instead, they were self-issued by the private entity that now claims jurisdiction. There is no appeals process, because there is no governing body to appeal to. The island on paper governs itself. That single fact is the crux of the entire story. Because if a private entity can legally issue its own permits on land no nation claims, it has done more than build an estate. It has begun building a country. None of this required breaking a single law. It required knowing exactly where the laws stopped applying, and having the resources to occupy that gap before anyone else noticed. That is the real discovery here, and not the island, but the blueprint. Legal scholars are only now beginning to catalog how many of these gaps exist worldwide. Reefs with disputed sovereignty, waters with overlapping claims, registries with no verification requirement. Each one is a door. This is simply the first time someone walked all the way through. The purchase price itself was never publicly disclosed. Estimates from maritime finance analysts range wildly, from tens of millions to over $1 billion. The uncertainty itself tells its own story. When even the cost is a secret, the buyer's intent probably is too. What's certain is the pace. From first filing to first concrete pour took under 14 months. For comparison, most private island developments take 3 to 5 years to clear permitting alone. This project skipped permitting almost entirely. Because on paper, there was no one left to grant it. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unrelated dispute, a fishing rights lawsuit in a neighboring territory. Court documents from that case referenced the sovereign entity to the north in passing. It was the first time any government document acknowledged the island's new status, even indirectly. The filing was sealed within a week. Put together, the paper trail tells a story most people never think to look for. Not a scandal of stolen money, a quieter, stranger scandal of stolen jurisdiction. The kind that doesn't show up in a headline, only in the silence where a headline should be. Trusts add another layer entirely, separating legal ownership from beneficial ownership. The trustee who signs the paperwork often has no idea who ultimately benefits. That's not a flaw in the system, it's the entire feature. Beneficial ownership registries exist in some countries, but rarely reach this far offshore. Nominee directors are a well-worn tool in offshore finance, professionals who lend their name to companies they've never run. Several jurisdictions allow a single nominee to sit on the boards of thousands of companies at once. One filing traced back to this project listed a nominee director already attached to over 4,000 other entities. He had, by every account, no idea an island was among them. Maritime law adds its own peculiar wrinkle. A landmass can, in rare circumstances, be treated more like a vessel than a territory. Vessels register under whichever flag offers the friendliest terms, regardless of where they were built or who owns them. Applying that same logic to a reef required a legal argument almost no one had tried before. Applying that same logic to a reef required a legal argument almost no one had tried before. It worked, largely because no court had ever been asked whether it could. Currency also played a quiet role in the acquisition. Payments were structured in a stable, widely accepted digital settlement asset. That choice sidestepped currency controls in at least 2 of the jurisdictions involved. A small detail, but it removed one more point where regulators could have intervened. Insurance underwriters, oddly enough, were among the first outside parties to quietly acknowledge the island's unusual status. Insurance underwriters, oddly enough, were among the first outside parties to quietly acknowledge the island's status. A specialty policy covering the property listed its jurisdiction as to be determined pending registry classification. That's a phrase underwriters almost never use. It suggests even the insurance industry wasn't fully sure what it was insuring. That's a phrase underwriters almost never use. It suggests even the insurance industry wasn't fully sure. Local fishing families who once held informal rights to these waters described the buyout as fast, quiet, and difficult to refuse. Several were offered sums far above the market rate for their vessels and equipment. None were told exactly who was buying or why. By the time construction began, there was no one left nearby to ask. A regional anti-corruption watchdog flagged the transaction pattern as consistent with beneficial ownership concealment. The report named no individuals, citing insufficient evidence. It did, however, map the exact chain of shell companies investigators had already identified. That report remains the single most detailed public document on the entire acquisition. What ties every piece of this discovery together is patience. None of these steps happened quickly or drew attention on their own. Spread across 3 years and 4 jurisdictions, each move looked unremarkable in isolation. Only assembled together do they reveal the outline of a deliberate, decade-defining plan. From the water, the estate looks almost ordinary. Glass, timber, a curve of white sand. It's the part built to be photographed. Underneath and around it sits an entirely different structure, one built to be defended. Security consultants who reviewed satellite imagery identified an EMP-shielded core beneath the main residence. Electromagnetic shielding is normally reserved for military command posts and national data centers. Building it into a private residence is almost unheard of. Almost, built for something far greater. The estate's private security force operates on a rotation more common to a small military base than a household staff. Multiple analysts estimate the on-site detail at over 60 personnel. That's larger than the standing security detail of some small nations. And it answers to exactly one employer. Every entry point uses biometric verification, retina, gait, and voice layered together. A single mismatched signature triggers a lockdown of that zone within seconds. There is no keycard to steal, no code to guess. The system was designed by the same firms that harden government facilities. Beneath the visible compound sits a vault-grade data center, fully redundant and self-powered. It runs independent of any external network the moment it detects an intrusion attempt. In effect, the island's most sensitive information can go dark on command. No outside authority can compel access to what isn't connected. The estate's private airstrip receives aircraft that file no public flight plan. Under most national airspace rules, that alone would ground a flight before it left the runway. Here, there's no controlling authority to enforce the rule. The runway exists in the same legal gap as the island itself. A tip surfaced last month from a charter pilot who described flying a well-known billionaire to the island. The pilot would not name the client on record, but the description of the security detail waiting on the tarmac matched exactly what analysts had already mapped from orbit. Someone with real means was already living the theory. The estate's marine perimeter holds a hard exclusion zone roughly half a mile offshore. Vessels that drift too close report an automated radio warning, then an intercept within minutes. No Coast Guard patrols these waters, the private fleet does. It behaves in every functional sense like a national maritime border. Redundant power is drawn from a private substation buried beneath the eastern ridge. If the primary grid fails, the switch to reserve power happens in under 4 seconds. No flicker, no gap, the power is absolute. The entire compound is engineered to never once notice an outage. What strikes security analysts most isn't any single feature, it's the layering. Physical barriers, digital barriers, legal barriers, and now airspace and maritime barriers, all stacked together. Most private estates pick 1 or 2 of these. This one built all 5. The complete structure is now visible. Contrast the 2 images side by side, the postcard beach and the reinforced corridor beneath it. Monastic industrial noir. One is for the world to see. The other is for the world to never find. Both were built by the same architects, on the same budget, at the same time. A former security contractor speaking on condition of anonymity described the brief he was given. Build it like a resort, defend it like a border. He said he'd never received an instruction quite like it before. He also said he wasn't the only contractor given that same brief that year, because this isn't an isolated project. Multiple private security firms report a rise in similar contracts across remote coastal properties. Each one, individually, could pass as an eccentric billionaire's paranoia. Together, they start to look like a pattern. The estate's blast-rated garden wall conceals a service corridor connecting the residents directly to the bunker. In an emergency, the walk from bedroom to shelter takes under 90 seconds. Every design choice assumes the emergency will come. Not if when, a shift in global priority. Analysts note that EMP shielding only makes sense against a very specific threat model. That's not a threat model most private citizens plan around. It's a threat model nations plan around. Military precision is the standard, which raises the obvious question, who exactly is this island preparing for war? The visible estate, the one in the marketing photos, was never the point. It was cover, a plausible explanation for why so much money moved to this one coordinate. The real structure lives underneath, behind, and around it. Whoever is spending nights on that island right now already knows what almost no one else does. The postcard and the fortress are the same building, and the fortress was finished long before the postcard photo was taken, which means the next question isn't what they built, it's why they think they'll need it. To understand why someone builds a private country, look first at what they've stopped trusting. For most of modern history, wealth flowed through banks and stayed under national law. That assumption is no longer holding for everyone. And the people it's failing first are the people who can afford to leave. Confidence in traditional banking has eroded unevenly but persistently since the 2008 crisis. The final conclusion is inescapable. The system is shifting. For ordinary depositors, there's rarely another option. For the ultra-wealthy, there increasingly is. A departure from the known system. Central banks printed sums to stabilize economies, but diluted everything else. Every unit printed quietly dilutes the value of every unit already held. For someone holding a modest savings account, that's a slow erosion. For someone holding 9 or 10 figures, it's a strategic problem worth solving. The solution for a growing number of family offices isn't a better bank. It's reducing dependence on any bank or any government at all. Private islands, independent currencies, personal legal jurisdictions. Each is a hedge against the same underlying fear that the nation-state itself is no longer a safe store of value. Footage from formerly thriving financial districts tells its own quiet story. Trading floors that once ran 24 hours now sit dark by early evening. Confidence in traditional banking has eroded unevenly but persistently. The buildings remain, the confidence inside them does not. Compare that skyline to the one rising on the Forbidden Island. The contrast is stark. Lit, staffed, funded, and growing, while the mainland financial core dims behind it. It's not a coincidence, it's a transfer. Capital and confidence moving from the visible system into a private one. A broader migration of capital toward independent structures is underway. Every unit printed quietly dilutes the value of every unit already held. Wealth evaporates. Private banking, private security, private courts even, through international arbitration. The island is simply the most literal expression of a trend already well underway. A former regulator who asked not to be identified described the shift bluntly. Now some of them are trying to replace it, a quiet revolution. That's a stronger claim than most analysts are willing to make on the record. But the infrastructure being built matches the claim almost exactly. Forensic evidence. Every one of those has a private market substitute now available. Available to someone with enough capital. The market provides the alternative. Independent currencies, private arbitration, private security contractors, private infrastructure, and now apparently a private landmass to house it all. The island's founders haven't spoken publicly and likely never will, but the structure itself speaks clearly enough. The island's founders haven't spoken publicly and likely never will, but the structure itself speaks clearly enough. Failed micronation projects have appeared for decades. A platform here, a converted oil rig there. Nearly all of them failed for the same reason. Nearly all of them failed for the same reason: insufficient capital to survive contact with reality. It's worth pausing on what unlimited actually means here. Family offices connected to this project control assets well into the tens of billions. That's more liquid capital than the operating budget of some mid-sized nations. Enough to build not just an estate, but the beginnings of an economy. Enough to build not just an estate, but the beginnings of an economy. The abandoned trading floors aren't evidence that money has disappeared. It's evidence that money has moved somewhere the cameras can't easily follow. Somewhere with its own security, its own power grid, its own legal gravity. Somewhere increasingly resembling a country in everything but name. Ask yourself what happens if this experiment succeeds. Not succeeds as a home, succeeds as a template. Every family office watching quietly takes notes. And the gap between private estate and private nation gets a little smaller for the next buyer. That's the real stakes of the sovereign shift. If jurisdiction itself can be purchased and engineered, the idea of a shared nation starts to bend. If jurisdiction itself can be purchased and engineered, the very idea of a shared nation starts to bend. The bending of the shared nation for one family soon affects everyone. None of this required a single law to change. It only required enough capital to make the existing laws irrelevant. That's the quiet, uncomfortable truth behind the pristine photos of this island. It isn't an escape from the system, it's a replacement for it. And replacements once built tend to attract more builders. Which is exactly what the next act of this story reveals. Beyond the fortress walls, a second layer of ambition becomes visible: total technological independence. This island doesn't just defend itself, it intends to never need the outside world at all. Every basic input, power, water, food, connectivity, has its own private supply chain. That's not a luxury feature, that's a design philosophy. The power system runs on a private microgrid, combining solar arrays with high-density storage. Engineers who reviewed public procurement filings estimate reserve capacity at over 72 hours. For comparison, most national grids don't guarantee even a fraction of that resilience. This island simply built its own. Connectivity comes not through undersea cables alone, but through a private link to a low Earth orbit satellite constellation. Several billionaires behind competing satellite internet ventures have discussed exactly this kind of private access in public interviews. What's unusual here is having the leverage to negotiate a fully independent, redundant link. One that keeps working even if every terrestrial cable to the region is cut. A private desalination plant converts seawater into fresh water at a scale far beyond the island's current population. Engineers describe this as building for the city it plans to become, not the compound it currently is. That single detail matters more than it first appears. You don't overbuild infrastructure for a vacation home. Food security follows the same logic, a climate-controlled agricultural dome capable of year-round yield. It removes dependence on any shipping route, any port, any customs authority. In a genuine supply chain crisis, the mainland goes hungry before this island notices a shortage. That asymmetry is, quite literally, the point. The island's internal data network is air-gapped from the public internet by default. Every external connection has to be explicitly authorized, then closed again after use. Cybersecurity researchers call this the gold standard for critical infrastructure. Applying it to a private residence is almost without precedent. A private seismic and weather sensor array feeds real-time data no public agency ever sees. It gives the island earlier warning of storms, swells, and geological shifts than any neighboring nation receives. Information here is treated as infrastructure, something to own outright, not share. That single mindset shift explains everything. None of these technologies is new or exotic on its own. All exist commercially today. What's unprecedented is combining them. What's unprecedented is combining every one of them at this scale under a single private roof. Most nations haven't fully achieved this. Engineers involved in similar private infrastructure projects describe a phrase circulating in the industry: sovereign-grade resilience. It used to describe hardened government facilities. Now it describes a growing market of private clients. This island may be the most complete example built to date. One contractor said the brief asked for 100-year infrastructure. Infrastructure built to still be functioning in a century, regardless of who or what governs the region by then. That's founder language? Consider what this technological independence actually buys: immunity from blackouts, supply shocks, cyber attacks, even most natural disasters. Every one of those is a real rising risk across the world's aging infrastructure. This island simply opted out. Some analysts see this as the genuine blueprint for the next century of private living, a self-contained template. The hardest part was never the technology, it was affording it, and affording the invisibility around it. That cost is dropping. Which means this likely isn't the last island built this way. It's simply the first one anyone has managed to document. The private sensor network means this island can, in theory, predict a regional crisis before any government agency does. In a genuine emergency, that head start could mean days of extra warning, days that, for everyone else, simply won't exist. That asymmetry is a preview of a world where safety itself becomes a purchasable private good, engineered by whoever can afford total self-sufficiency. As this technological stack matures, it starts to resemble something bigger than a home, a functioning, self-sufficient microeconomy. The only thing it's still missing, on paper, is formal recognition, and recognition has never mattered as much as capability. If this kind of independence keeps spreading among the ultra-wealthy, what happens to the nations they're quietly opting out of? Every new claim to territory eventually meets an old one, and this island is no exception. 3 neighboring nations have overlapping claims. What's unprecedented is combining every one of them at this scale under a single private roof. Most nations haven't fully achieved this. Engineers involved in similar private infrastructure projects describe a phrase circulating in the industry: sovereign-grade resilience. It used to describe hardened government facilities. Now it describes a growing market of private clients. This island may be the most complete example built to date. One contractor said the brief asked for 100-year infrastructure. Infrastructure built to still be functioning in a century, regardless of who or what governs the region by then. That's founder language? Consider what this technological independence actually buys: immunity from blackouts, supply shocks, cyber attacks, even most natural disasters. Diplomatic cables reviewed by regional journalists describe quiet alarm inside 2 foreign ministries, not over the island, but the precedent. Some analysts see this as the genuine blueprint for the next century of private living, a self-contained template. The hardest part was never the technology, it was affording it, and affording the invisibility around it. That cost is dropping, which means this likely isn't the last island built this way. It's simply the first one anyone has managed to document. The private sensor network means this island can, in theory, predict a regional crisis before any government agency does. Privately, officials describe it as establishing a presence before the boundary hardens further. Neither side wants to be the one that blinks first. The island's private security fleet has, on at least 2 documented occasions, shadowed a foreign patrol vessel, just closely enough to make a point. Analysts describe this as a soft display of capability without ever crossing into open confrontation. It's deterrence, built entirely without a flag. What's emerging here has a name among geopolitical analysts: a silent trade war over a new kind of territory. Not territory for resources or trade routes, but territory as a legal loophole itself. Whoever controls the loophole controls a potential template worth billions to replicate elsewhere. If the claim holds, similar claims will likely follow worldwide. If it doesn't, it may trigger the first real legal confrontation between private capital and sovereign law. Either outcome reshapes how territory gets defined going forward. Private intelligence firms have reportedly been retained by at least one neighboring government to monitor the island's activity. That's a striking reversal, a nation surveilling a private entity. In public, almost nothing has been said at all. The silence itself is telling. Analysts suggest this reflects uncertainty over how existing law even applies. Multiple sources describe active due diligence underway in at least 2 other regions. The blueprint, once proven, doesn't stay unique for long. A retired admiral described it bluntly. This isn't a house with security, this is a nation with a beach. It mirrors small state naval doctrine. The tension isn't only diplomatic, it's economic. A functioning, tax-independent micro-jurisdiction undermines the tax base of every neighboring claimant. Regional finance ministries have quietly begun modeling the long-term revenue impact. Early estimates are not reassuring to any of them. There's also a security dimension few officials will discuss on record. A private, EMP-shielded territory is functionally a black box. For now, an uneasy stalemate holds. Just patrols, cables, and quiet monitoring. It's the geopolitical equivalent of holding your breath. It will likely determine whether this becomes a template or a cautionary tale. Both outcomes are being actively wargamed in rooms far from any camera. Either the island's model survives its first real legal test, or it becomes the reason similar projects never get attempted again. The island simply keeps building. Because whoever finishes first in a genuine legal or territorial dispute tends to define the rules everyone else has to follow after. That race is already underway. Almost no one watching the headlines has noticed it yet. Eventually, quiet monitoring gives way to something louder. A leaked coalition memo, drafted jointly by 3 finance ministries, finally puts the fear in writing. It warns that unresolved private sovereignty claims could fundamentally destabilize regional tax and maritime law. Once it leaks, the silence officially ends. Within days, an emergency session is called at a global economic summit. Officially, the agenda covers emerging jurisdictional challenges. Unofficially, every delegate in the room knows exactly which island prompted it. No one names it out loud, everyone is thinking of it anyway. Markets react before any official statement is issued. A rumor that regulators may move to freeze assets linked to the island sends a ripple through offshore finance indexes. The rumor is unconfirmed, the ripple is real. That alone tells you how much is now riding on this single case. The island's private legal team issues its first public statement in the entire saga, 2 sentences and nothing more. It asserts the entity operates in full compliance with all applicable maritime and corporate law. It does not specify which law or whose. The ambiguity is almost certainly intentional. Sovereign wealth funds with exposure to the region begin quietly recalculating their risk models. Several board discussions, described by people familiar with them, focus on a single question. If this claim holds, does it protect our capital or expose it to a legal fight none of us wanted? No fund wants to be first to answer that question publicly. A coalition of 3 governments finally drafts a joint statement, arguing the island's claim has no basis in recognized international law. It stops short of demanding enforcement action. No one is prepared to be the government that tries and fails to physically enforce a claim against unlimited private capital. The statement is deliberately toothless, and everyone in the room knows it. Meanwhile, other private entities exploring similar projects elsewhere pause to watch how this plays out. If the island's claim survives this pressure intact, the floodgates likely open. If it doesn't, the whole model may quietly die here before it spreads further. Billions in future private sovereignty projects hinge on this single unresolved case. A senior trade lawyer watching the case unfold offered a stark comparison. This is the corporate personhood debate all over again, except this time it's for an entire piece of land. Once a private entity can hold sovereign-like power, the legal questions cascade far beyond one island. Every existing treaty built around the assumption of nation-states starts to wobble slightly. The press, for its part, struggles to even categorize the story. Is it a real estate story, a finance story, a national security story? It's genuinely all three at once, which is exactly why it slipped past most mainstream coverage for so long. By the time it's fully understood, the island will likely already be finished. Naval assets in the region have quietly repositioned over the past several weeks. Officially, this is described as scheduled exercises. Regional analysts see it differently, a subtle show of readiness in case the standoff escalates beyond paperwork. No one expects open conflict. Everyone is preparing as if it's still possible. Behind closed doors, one finance minister reportedly floated a blunt proposal: simply buy the island back? The idea died within the same meeting. No single nation's treasury could realistically outbid the capital already committed to defending it. That, more than anything, illustrates how far the balance of power has already shifted. A retired diplomat, reflecting on the case, drew a comparison to the collapse of colonial-era chartered companies. Centuries ago, private trading companies briefly held quasi-sovereign power over vast territories, before nation-states eventually reasserted control. "We may be watching the same cycle begin again, in reverse," she said. Except this time, private capital has more resources than most of the nations trying to reassert control. The coalition's legal team ultimately concedes in an internal memo later leaked to press that no existing treaty framework cleanly applies. International maritime law wasn't written with self-declared private sovereignty in mind. Neither was corporate law, tax law, or diplomatic law. The island didn't break any single rule, it simply found the seam between all of them. As the standoff drags on, the island itself continues construction, entirely undisturbed. New structures rise, new satellite links activate, new reserves of food and water and power come online. It behaves in every observable way like an entity that has already concluded it will win this fight. Whether or not that confidence is justified remains, for now, untested. A junior analyst at one of the finance ministries, speaking anonymously, offered the most human observation in the whole saga. "We keep debating whether to call it a country. Meanwhile, it's already acting like one." That gap between what something is called and what it's actually doing may be the defining feature of this entire era. Words are still catching up to reality. By the final week of the summit, no resolution is reached. The coalition statement is quietly shelved. The tribunal case remains unresolved. The rumor-driven market dip fully recovers. On paper, nothing changes. In practice, everything already has. Because the real outcome of this entire fallout isn't a ruling, a statement, or a headline. It's the quiet confirmation, now visible to every family office watching, that this can be done. That sovereignty itself, in the right legal gaps, is purchasable. And once something is proven purchasable, someone always buys more of it. The island's builders, whoever they ultimately are, never had to win a war, a vote, or a court case. They only had to outlast the world's uncertainty about how to respond. And uncertainty, it turns out, is the easiest opponent there is to outlast. They simply kept building until the question stopped mattering. Which leaves us with the uncomfortable ending to this chapter of the story. Not a resolution, a precedent. One quiet island in contested waters has just shown the world's wealthiest families exactly how it's done. The only open question left is who moves next. So here's the uncomfortable question this story leaves behind. If the world's wealthiest families are already quietly opting out of the systems the rest of us depend on, what happens to those systems once enough of them leave? That's not a hypothetical anymore, it's already underway. The island itself doesn't need to answer that question, it simply needs to keep functioning while everyone else keeps asking it. Every additional year it survives makes the model harder to dismiss as an outlier, and easier for the next buyer to justify replicating. Consider the timeline laid out across this entire story. 14 months from purchase to construction, 18 months to quietly clear every prior claim. A security architecture built to survive anything short of open war. A technology stack designed to still be running in 100 years. None of that happened by accident. It happened because someone with nearly unlimited resources asked a very simple question. What if we stopped negotiating with the system and simply built our own, and then had the money to actually finish building it? That's the real story behind every image you've seen tonight. Not a scandal, not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense, just capital, patience, and legal precision applied at a scale most people never get to witness. Quietly building the exit ramp the rest of the world doesn't know exists yet. Whether this island ultimately wins its legal standoff almost doesn't matter anymore. The blueprint is already out there, visible to anyone willing to look closely enough. Family offices around the world already are. The only real question left is how many more of these quietly appear in the next decade. So we'll leave you with the same question every family office watching this is already asking themselves. If you had the means to opt out of the systems everyone else depends on, would you? And if the answer is yes, what does that tell you about the systems the rest of us are still standing inside? Tell us honestly in the comments below, what would you do if this option were actually on the table for you? Would you build the exit, or would you stay and try to fix the system everyone else still depends on? There's no wrong answer here, but there is an honest one, and we'd genuinely like to know yours. If this story left you with more questions than answers, that's exactly the point, because this island isn't really the end of the story. It's a symptom of a much bigger one about who actually controls the modern financial system and who's quietly building around it. And that story goes even deeper than this island does. If you want to understand exactly how deep this goes, the next chapter in this investigation is already waiting for you. It's called Billionaires Are the New IMF, and it picks up exactly where this story leaves off. Watch that next, and the picture will finally click fully into place. Whether this island ultimately wins its legal standoff almost doesn't matter anymore. The blueprint is already out there, visible to anyone willing to look closely enough. It's the same blueprint quietly reshaping global finance itself. One private loan, one sovereign hedge, one purchase jurisdiction at a time. The mainland skyline behind us keeps dimming a little more each year. The island in front of us keeps getting brighter. That contrast is the entire story, condensed into a single image. And it's not slowing down. So before you go, ask yourself one last time. Are you watching this shift from the outside, as most of us are? Or are you already building your own version of an exit on whatever scale you can manage? Either way, the systems around all of us are shifting faster than most people realize. This has been the story of the Forbidden Island, a place that officially still doesn't exist, and unofficially may already be the most important piece of territory nobody's talking about. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.